The Ink and the Echo, Chapter 1. The Unexpected Postmark. Santa Barbara, California. Spring, 2025. Evelyn Harper, or Eve as most knew her, sat at her sun-drenched desk, the Pacific Ocean, the shimmering expanse beyond her window. At 67, her life as a successful memoirist was one of ordered solitude, filled with words, memories, and the quiet rhythm of the tides. She'd found contentment in chronicling the lives of others, and occasionally, fragments of her own, always carefully edited, always polished. Her past, particularly her youth, felt neatly catalogued, a collection of stories she'd told herself countless times, each emotion carefully acknowledged and filed away. The mail arrived with the usual assortment of bills, book proofs, and the occasional fan letter. But one envelope stood out. It was heavy, cream-colored, with a handwritten address in an elegant, slightly shaky script. The postmark read, Ohio. Eve rarely received mail from Ohio. Her childhood home, a quiet, unassuming town she'd left behind over 50 years ago, never looking back. A town of forgotten names and faded memories, or so she thought. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of heavy paper, precisely folded, and a small, delicate sprig of dried forget-me-nots. The scent, faint and sweet, instantly transported her back to a spring garden, to a time of budding crushes and nascent dreams. She unfolded the letter. The handwriting, though older, was instantly recognizable. Her heart gave a sudden, unexpected lurch. Dear Miss Harper, I hope this letter finds you well. My daughter Rebecca recently read your memoir, Beneath the Santa Barbara Sky, and recognized your name. She insisted I reach out. It has been many years indeed. Half a century, in fact, since you sat in my English class at Elmwood High. You may not remember me, but I remember you quite vividly. I remember your insightful questions, your quiet intensity, and I remember every single one of your notebooks, each one a window into a remarkable mind. I remember every one of your notebooks. The words swam before Eve's eyes, her breath caught in her throat. The signature at the bottom, written with the same elegant flourish she remembered from countless assignments, solidified the impossible truth. Thomas Emerson, Mr. Emerson, her English teacher, the man who had ignited her passion for literature, who had seen something special in her quiet, awkward teenage self. The man she had, for a fleeting, intense period, loved with the fierce, unspoken devotion only a 15-year-old could muster. 50 years, half a century. And he remembered her notebooks. Not her face, not her grades, but her notebooks. The raw, messy, often vulnerable pages filled with her deepest thoughts, her fledgling poems, her clumsy attempts at short stories, the notebooks she had poured her soul into, knowing, somehow, that he would be the one to read them, to understand. A wave of heat, part blush, part forgotten excitement, surged through her. This wasn't just a letter from a former teacher. This was a direct echo from a time she thought was long buried, a secret garden of first love and unspoken longing suddenly illuminated by an unexpected ray of light. She closed her eyes, and the scent of forget-me-nots deepened, bringing with it a torrent of memories. Elmwood High, the dusty classroom, sunlight streaming through tall windows, the scent of old books and chalk, and him, Mr. Emerson, young then, perhaps 22 or 23, with kind eyes, a gentle smile, and a voice that made Shakespeare sing. Eve, a painfully shy girl with oversized glasses and a head full of stories, had been invisible to most, but not to him. He saw her. He nurtured her talent. He encouraged her. And in doing so, he had captured her heart. She remembered the way he would lean against his desk, discussing Dickens or Frost, his enthusiasm infectious. She remembered the way he'd pause after she spoke, truly listening, making her feel for the first time that her thoughts mattered. She remembered the thrill of his blue ink on her essays, not just grades, but insightful comments, questions that made her think harder, see deeper. And the notebooks, the ones she'd deliberately made messy, handwritten, hoping he'd see the raw, unpolished passion. The letter was a small, delicate key that, unlocking a door she thought was permanently sealed, a door to a part of herself she had kept hidden even from her closest friends, the part that had cherished the memory of Mr. Emerson, not just as a teacher, but as the first person who truly saw her. Her ordered solitude, her carefully curated past, suddenly felt fragile, permeable. The postmark from Ohio wasn't just a place, it was a portal. The elegant script, a thread pulling her back, 50 years into a secret, unspoken history, and the words, "I remember every one of your notebooks," were not just a kind reminiscence. They were a profound validation, a whispered acknowledgement across 5 decades that the most intimate parts of her young soul had been seen, understood, and remembered by the very person she had hoped would see them most. Chapter 2. The Pages of a Young Heart. Eve spent the rest of the day in a haze, the letter from Thomas Emerson a warm weight in her hand. Her mind drifted back, not just to random memories, but to a vivid, almost cinematic reel of her sophomore year at Elmwood High. She was 15, all angles and awkwardness, hidden behind a thick curtain of brown hair and books. Her solace was writing, not just for school, but in secret, filling notebooks with observations, feelings, nascent poetry, and the yearning heart of a girl who felt herself to be perpetually out of step with the world. And then, Mr. Emerson. He was new that year, fresh out of college, full of an almost revolutionary enthusiasm for literature. While other teachers droned, he ignited. He made Shakespeare feel like a contemporary drama, and Hemingway's terse prose a deeply emotional landscape. He didn't just teach, he breathed life into words. Eve, who rarely spoke in class, found herself raising her hand, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. He would listen, his head tilted slightly, his eyes a clear, intelligent blue, focused solely on her. "Evelyn, that's a very perceptive point," he'd say, and the simple acknowledgement would send a thrill through her that eclipsed any academic achievement. Her notebooks. That's what he'd remembered, not the perfectly crafted essays, but the free-form, unassigned entries she'd pour her heart into. She had developed a ritual. After completing her regular assignments, she would add extra pages to her notebook filled with tangential thoughts, literary analyses that went beyond the prompt, and sometimes veiled personal reflections. She knew he read them. He always returned them with a single handwritten word or phrase at the bottom of these extra pages. Insightful. Keep writing. Evocative. Yes. These small notes were her lifeline, proof that her true self, the self hidden behind the shy exterior, was being seen. She remembered one particular entry. It was after a class discussion on The Great Gatsby, and she had written a long, passionate reflection on Daisy Buchanan's lost dreams and the tragedy of unfulfilled potential. At the end, almost as a postscript, she had penned a few lines of her own poetry, something about a heart searching for a kindred spirit in a crowded room. When she got the notebook back, below her poem, he had simply written, "A profound observation, Evelyn. Keep searching." The words had resonated deep within her, a private message that felt intensely personal. Her crush on him had been immediate and overwhelming. It was the kind of pure, idealized love only a teenager can experience. Innocent, consuming, utterly hopeless. He was 23, married. She knew this, saw his simple gold band, and her teacher. The chasm between them was vast, uncrossable. Yet, in her secret world, he was everything. He was the reason she woke up, the reason she wrote, the reason she dared to dream of a life beyond Elmwood. She'd spent hours in the library, poring over the books he recommended, trying to absorb every piece of wisdom, every literary reference, as if by osmosis she could somehow bridge the gap between them. She even started dressing a little differently, discarding her most unfashionable clothes for something she thought he might find more intelligent. It was a futile effort, she knew, but it was her quiet, desperate plea to be seen, truly seen, not just as a student, but as a person. One afternoon, she'd stayed after class, ostensibly to ask a question about a research paper. But what she really wanted was just to be in his presence, to hear his voice, to absorb his quiet intensity. He had looked up from his desk, a gentle smile on his face. "Evelyn, still working?" He noticed her habit of lingering. "You have a true passion for words, don't you?" "Yes, Mr. Emerson," she'd stammered, her cheeks burning. I just love how words can create worlds." He had nodded, his blue eyes warm. "They can, Evelyn. They truly can. And you, I believe, have the power to create beautiful ones." Those words, they had lived in her heart for 50 years. A quiet encouragement that had shaped her entire life, steering her towards a career in writing, a life dedicated to the craft he had taught her to revere. Now, holding his letter, those memories weren't just nostalgic. They were alive, pulsing with a forgotten energy. He hadn't just taught her English, he had taught her to see herself, to value her own voice, and in return, she had given him the purest admiration of a young, budding soul. The quiet acknowledgement in his letter, "I remember every one of your notebooks," was not just about the pages, but about the girl who wrote them. And in those simple words, Evelyn felt an echo of that long-ago connection, a profound validation that spanned half a century. Her carefully constructed past was not just being revisited, it was being rewritten, infused with a new, astonishing layer of meaning. Chapter 3. Letters Across Time. Eve knew she had to respond. The thought of letting this unexpected connection wither was unbearable. But what to say? How to bridge 50 years of silence, of unspoken admiration, of a secret teenage crush? She drafted several replies, each feeling either too formal, too informal, or too revealing. Finally, she settled on a tone of respectful reminiscence, balancing her professional persona with the genuine warmth she felt. "Dear Mr. Emerson, your letter was a wonderful surprise. And yes, I remember you very well. Your English class was, without a doubt, the most formative educational experience of my youth. You truly ignited a passion for literature and storytelling within me that has shaped my entire life. And to know you remembered my notebooks, that means more than I can possibly express. They were indeed where I poured my true self, my raw thoughts, and my deepest aspirations. Your quiet encouragement on those pages was a lifeline for a shy, awkward teenager. You saw me, Mr. Emerson, in a way no one else did. I would be honored to continue this correspondence if you are amenable. I am curious about your life after Elmwood, and I would love to share a bit about mine. With deepest gratitude, Evelyn Harper, Eve. She sent it and then waited, a nervous flutter in her stomach she hadn't felt since her first book review. The days stretched into a week. Then 2. Had she been too forward? Had he merely been polite? Then a second letter arrived. Again, the elegant script, the Ohio postmark, and again, a delicate sprig of dried flowers, this time a tiny white blossom she didn't recognize. Dear Eve, if I may be so bold, given your memoir's title and your openness, your letter was a true delight. It reassures me that the seeds I hope to plant occasionally bore fruit. And yes, I remember your dedication to those notebooks. They truly stood out. Even then, I sensed a profound depth and an innate storytelling ability in your writing. It was a privilege to witness it unfold. You are quite right. A half-century is a long time. After Elmwood, I continued teaching for another 30 years, mostly at a small liberal arts college in Ohio. My wife Eleanor and I raised 2 children, Rebecca, who found your book, and David. Eleanor passed away 5 years ago, after a long illness. It has been a quiet time since then. I followed your career with quiet pride, seeing your name on book covers and in literary reviews. I always hoped you had fulfilled the promise I saw in those early pages. It seems you have, beautifully so. Please, tell me about your life, your writing, your journeys. I confess, retirement has afforded me ample time for reflection, and revisiting these connections from the past brings a surprising warmth to these later years. With sincere regards, Thomas Emerson. Eve read the letter 3 times. He called her Eve. He remembered her notebooks not just as a courtesy, but as profound depth and innate storytelling ability. He had followed her career, and he was a widower. The last piece of information landed with a bittersweet ache in her chest. His quiet acknowledgement of loss resonated with her own solitary life, though hers was by choice, his by circumstance. This was more than just a polite exchange. This was a man who remembered her, who saw her, even across decades, a man who still revered words as she did. The correspondence began to flow, a gentle current connecting their 2 distant lives. Eve wrote about her travels, her process as a memoirist, the challenges and joys of capturing lives on paper. She shared her thoughts on the literary world, on the craft of writing. She found herself revealing more of her inner world than she had to anyone in years. Thomas, in turn, wrote about his teaching career, the students who had touched his heart, the enduring power of literature to shape young minds. He shared anecdotes about his family, his beloved Eleanor, their children. He spoke of his love for gardening, his quiet life in Ohio, the solace he found in nature and in the classic texts he continued to reread. His letters were filled with insightful observations, literary allusions, and a gentle humor that made her smile. He often made subtle references to her past notebooks, recalling specific phrases or ideas she'd scribbled down, proving he truly had remembered. I recall a particularly eloquent passage in one of your early notebooks, Eve. On the ephemeral nature of joy, he wrote in one letter. You captured it with a clarity that belied your years. Do you still find joy to be so fleeting, or has age lent it more permanence? Her heart skipped a beat. He remembered that, a half-formed thought from a 15-year-old's private musings. It was astonishing. Eve pored over his letters, dissecting each phrase, finding layers of meaning. She started to see the young Mr. Emerson in the older Thomas. The essence of the man she had admired still shining through. And she began to wonder, with a mix of trepidation and exhilarating possibility, if the quiet connection they shared now, across 5 decades and thousands of miles, was something more than just a nostalgic reunion. It felt like a profound resonance, 2 souls finding each other again, connected by the enduring power of words and the unseen threads of a shared, unspoken past. The quiet bloom of attraction. Once a forbidden fantasy, was now a gentle, mature possibility. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Classroom. The correspondence between Eve and Thomas continued, each letter a stepping stone across the vast chasm of time. Their communication was a blend of intellectual discourse and increasingly personal revelations, weaving a tapestry of shared interests and emerging vulnerabilities. Eve found herself anticipating his letters with a youthful eagerness she hadn't felt in decades. She reread all of Thomas's letters, each one carefully preserved in a rosewood box on her desk. She noticed a pattern, his profound memory for her early writing, his specific recall of her thoughts and questions from 50 years ago. It wasn't just a polite nod to a former student. It was a testament to an almost obsessive attention, a deep impression she had made on him. One morning, over coffee with her lifelong friend Sarah, Eve found herself confessing. Sarah, a vibrant woman with a no-nonsense attitude, had been her confidant since their elementary school days. "You won't believe what's happening," Eve began, pushing Thomas's latest letter across the table. "Mr. Emerson, my English teacher from high school." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Emerson? The one you had such a crush on? The one you wrote all those terrible poems about?" Sarah chuckled, remembering Eve's teenage angst. Eve felt a blush creep up her neck. "They weren't terrible," she defended weakly. "And yes, him. He wrote to me, and we've been corresponding for months." Sarah read the letter, her expression softening. "He sounds lovely, Eve, and he clearly remembers you. Profound depth, innate storytelling ability. He saw it then, didn't he? He always believed in you." "But Sarah," Eve whispered, leaning forward, "he remembers everything. My notebooks, specific lines. He even mentioned that poem I wrote about a heart searching for a kindred spirit." Sarah looked at her, her eyes suddenly serious. "Eve, that's not just a teacher remembering a student. That's profound." "He sounds like he remembered you, Evelyn, the soul of you, not just the essays. But it was so long ago. He was married. I was a child. A child with a brilliant mind and a sensitive heart, which he recognized," Sarah countered. "And he's a widower now. And you're Eve, and you're both writers. You both love words. Don't you see the echo?" Eve did. The echo was getting louder. In his next letter, Thomas shared a more personal revelation. "Eleanor and I had a beautiful life." He wrote, "And I loved her deeply, but there was always a part of me, a quiet, almost academic part, that felt a profound connection to the students who truly poured their souls into their work. You were one of them, Eve. Your dedication, your intensity, It was unique. It left an indelible mark. He went on to describe a period in his life after Eleanor's passing, a profound sense of loneliness. I returned to my old student notebooks, he admitted, a way to revisit a time when I felt most alive, most impactful, and yours, Evelyn, were always the first I turned to. I found solace in your budding intellect, in the raw beauty of your early prose. It was as if a part of me, the part that connected so deeply with the purity of language, found a mirror in your pages. Your work, even then, resonated with my own deepest understanding of the human condition. Eve's hand trembled as she read his words. He had found solace in her notebooks after his wife's death. Her youthful scribblings, her vulnerabilities, her unspoken dreams had somehow provided comfort to him, the man who had been her guiding light. The roles had, subtly, reversed. He, the mentor, had been nurtured by the very soul he had once inspired. This was more than just remembering a gifted student. This was an admission of a deeper, unspoken connection, a profound intellectual and emotional resonance that had transcended the boundaries of teacher and pupil and the passage of time. He then posed a question that both thrilled and terrified her. I find myself wondering, Eve, if we might perhaps meet in person. It feels almost necessary. To put a face to these 50 years of remembered words, I understand if this is too forward, but the thought has grown too strong to ignore. Eve stared at the words, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. Meet him? The idea was exhilarating, terrifying. What if the reality didn't live up to the idealized image she had carried for so long? What if the echoes of the classroom were just that? Echoes, and not a living, breathing harmony. She looked out at the Pacific, its vastness mirroring the expanse of her own journey. The shy girl with the oversized glasses and the secret crush. The accomplished memoirist living a solitary life. And now, this unexpected invitation from the man who had seen her soul in the pages of her notebooks. The past was no longer just a collection of memories. It was a living, breathing possibility, beckoning her forward into a future she had never dared to imagine. The ink from her youthful words and his quiet comments had created a bridge across 5 decades, inviting her to cross it and to find out if the resonance of remembrance could truly bloom into something profound. Chapter 5: A Leap Across the Decades. Decision to meet Thomas Emerson was not made lightly. Eve spent days wrestling with it, her heart pulled between the exhilarating possibility of connection and the fear of shattering a cherished, idealized memory. Sarah, ever the pragmatic friend, offered unwavering support. "What's the worst that can happen, Eve?" Sarah asked over their usual morning coffee. "He's not a monster. He's the man who inspired you, and you're a successful, fascinating woman. If it's awkward, you have a lovely anecdote. If it's more, well, then you gain something beautiful." Eve knew Sarah was right. The risk of regret, of forever wondering what if, far outweighed the risk of awkwardness. She wrote back to Thomas, her hand surprisingly steady. "Dear Thomas, the thought of meeting after all this time is indeed a profound one. And yes, I would very much like that. I will be in Ohio for a literary event in late summer. Perhaps we could arrange to meet then, perhaps a quiet lunch, or simply a cup of tea. I look forward to it immensely. Yours, Eve." The arrangements were made with a surprising ease that felt almost fated. Thomas suggested a small, independent bookstore in a quaint town near his home in Ohio. a place with a quiet cafe. It felt fitting, a neutral ground filled with the very words that had connected them. As the day approached, Eve felt a mix of nervous excitement and quiet apprehension. She chose her outfit carefully, something elegant but approachable. She styled her silver hair, a stark contrast to the thick brown curtain of her youth. She looked at herself in the mirror, searching for the 15-year-old girl who had idolized him, and found instead a woman who had come into her own, shaped by the very spark he had ignited. The day of the meeting dawned bright and clear in Ohio. Eve arrived at the bookstore a few minutes early, her heart thrumming against her ribs. She scanned the faces in the cafe, a group of retirees sipping coffee, a young mother reading to her child, no one. Then she saw him. Sitting at a table by the window, a book open before him, but his gaze sweeping the entrance. He had aged, of course. His once dark hair was now completely white, thinning at the crown. His shoulders were a little stooped, but his eyes, those clear, intelligent blue eyes, were unmistakable. And the gentle, slightly shy smile. It was him, Thomas Emerson. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He stood, a little stiffly, but with an inherent grace. "Eve?" he asked, his voice softer than she remembered, but still carrying that same thoughtful cadence. "Thomas," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. She walked towards him, and he took a step forward, extending his hand. His grip was warm, firm. For a moment, they simply stood there, hands clasped, gazing at each other across 5 decades. The air thrummed with unspoken history, with the ghosts of classrooms and ink-stained notebooks, with the quiet longing of a young girl and the profound recognition of a wise man. "It is truly wonderful to see you," Thomas said, his eyes sparkling with a genuine warmth. "Even more wonderful than I had imagined." "You too, Thomas," Eve replied, a lump forming in her throat. "More than I could have ever hoped." They sat, and the conversation flowed easily, surprisingly so. There was no awkwardness, no forced small talk. They spoke of their lives, their families, their losses, their triumphs. He spoke of Eleanor with gentle affection, a quiet grief that still resonated. Eve spoke of her solitary life, her writing, the paths she had chosen. But it was when they began to discuss literature that the true magic of their connection reasserted itself. He quoted a line from a poem she'd analyzed in her notebook. She finished his thought, offering a deeper interpretation. They spoke of authors, of themes, of the power of words, and it was as if no time had passed at all. The shy 15-year-old and the inspiring teacher had found each other again, not as disparate entities, but as 2 mature souls, kindred spirits finally meeting on equal footing. "I have to confess, Eve," Thomas said, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "When I stumbled upon your memoir and then reread some of your old notebooks, it wasn't just professional pride. There was always something about your voice, your insight, that resonated with me profoundly. Even then, it wasn't appropriate to acknowledge it, of course, but you were always different, special." Eve felt a rush of emotions so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "And you, Thomas," she said, her voice thick, "you were the first person who ever saw me, truly saw me. You shaped my entire life. Your belief in me, it was everything." He reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. His touch was comforting, filled with an unspoken understanding. "And you, Eve," he said, his gaze unwavering. "You showed me the enduring power of a young, unblemished spirit. You reminded me why I became a teacher. In that moment, 50 years of unspoken admiration, of quiet longing, of profound influence, coalesced into a tangible connection. The student who had loved her teacher, the teacher who had nurtured her soul, they had found each other again, not as echoes of the past, but as two individuals on the precipice of a new, unexpected, and deeply resonant future. The ink from her youthful words and the wisdom in his comments had forged a bridge across 5 decades, and they had finally crossed it, stepping into a shared present, ready to see where the resonance of remembrance would lead them. Chapter 6. The Unspoken Bridge. The initial meeting in the bookstore cafe stretched for hours, bleeding into a late afternoon stroll through the quaint Ohio town. Eve and Thomas walked side by side, their conversation flowing effortlessly, a comfortable rhythm established decades ago, now reawakened. They spoke of books and dreams, of life's unexpected turns, and of the quiet wisdom that only age can bestow. Eve found herself drawn to Thomas's profound intellectual curiosity, his gentle humor, and the deep reservoir of kindness in his eyes. He, in turn, was captivated by her sharp intellect, her vibrant spirit, and the quiet passion that still burned within her. The physical awkwardness of their ages seemed to dissolve, replaced by the effortless connection of kindred spirits. "I always wondered, Eve," Thomas mused as they walked past an old brick schoolhouse, "what path you would take. I knew you would write. It was inevitable. But I never imagined you'd become a memoirist, telling the stories of lives." "You taught me the power of story, Thomas," Eve replied, smiling. "The importance of finding the narrative thread in the seemingly chaotic. And isn't every life a story waiting to be told?" He stopped, turning to face her, his eyes warm. "Indeed. And you, Evelyn, have quite a story yourself, one that I feel incredibly privileged to be a small part of." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply within her. He truly saw her, not just the student, but the woman, the writer, the evolving soul. And in his presence, Eve felt a sense of being utterly understood, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been yearning for. Before Eve left Ohio, they agreed to continue their correspondence. But now it felt different. The letters held a new intimacy, a quiet acknowledgement of the deepening affection that was blossoming between them. They were no longer just reminiscing. They were actively building something new, a shared narrative for their twilight years. Back in Santa Barbara, Eve's life felt infused with a newfound lightness. Her writing flowed with a renewed energy, her characters imbued with a depth she hadn't accessed in years. She spoke to Sarah often, sharing every detail of her meetings with Thomas. "He's wonderful, Sarah," she gushed, a giddy note in her voice she hadn't heard since high school. "He's just as I remembered, but so much more. He sees me, and I see him. It's like we speak the same language, the language of the soul." Sarah simply smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Took you long enough, Evie. Some connections are just meant to be, no matter how long they take to find their way." Over the next few months, their letters transformed. They spoke less of the past and more of their present. They discussed their daily lives, their hopes, their quiet fears. Thomas shared his love for his garden, sending her photographs of his prize-winning roses. Eve shared her writing process, sometimes sending him fragments of new prose for his editorial eye. Their connection was no longer a nostalgic echo. It was a vibrant, living bridge, stretching across thousands of miles. One evening, Eve received a package from Ohio. Inside, carefully wrapped, was a small, worn, leather-bound book. It was her old English notebook from sophomore year, the one with her thoughts on the Great Gatsby and her nascent poem about a heart searching for a kindred spirit. A note from Thomas was tucked inside. "Dear Eve, I found this tucked away in a box of old teaching materials. I held onto it and a few others over the years. Not just yours, of course, but the ones that truly spoke to me. They were a testament to the remarkable minds I had the privilege to encounter. But yours was always special. I hope you don't mind. Perhaps it's time for it to return home. And perhaps, too, it's time for us to consider a more permanent closeness. The thought of sharing these later years with someone who understands the very deepest parts of my soul, who has been quietly present in my life for half a century, is a profound and comforting one. I miss our daily discussions. I miss your insights. I miss you. Would you consider coming to Ohio? Not just for a visit, but to see if this quiet resonance between us could become a shared harmony with deepest affection and hope." Thomas. Eve traced the faded ink on the cover of her old notebook. "Evelyn Harper, English 2, Mr. Emerson." Inside, she found her youthful scrawl and his precise blue ink comments, "Profound observation. Keep searching." And on that page, the poem she'd written, and below it, his indelible, simple words, "A profound observation, Evelyn. Keep searching." He had been searching too, for 50 years, and now he was inviting her to search no more. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy and a profound sense of destiny. The unspoken bridge between them, built on the ink of her young heart and the quiet wisdom of his discerning eye, was now complete. He had seen her then, and he saw her now. And in his quiet, enduring memory of her notebooks, he had gifted her the most profound love of all, the love of a kindred soul who recognized and cherished the deepest, most authentic parts of her being. A resonance that had patiently waited for half a century to finally find its perfect, harmonious accord. The long-hidden truth of her youthful affection was finally met with a love that had quietly persisted, waiting, until the perfect moment for their paths to truly converge. Chapter 7. A Harmony Found. The decision was swift, clear, and utterly exhilarating. Eve called Thomas immediately, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Thomas," she whispered. "Yes, I will come to Ohio. And yes, I want to see if this quiet resonance can become a shared harmony." She began to pack, her Santa Barbara home, once a symbol of her chosen solitude, now feeling like a cocoon she was ready to shed. Sarah, understanding the enormity of the moment, helped her sort through belongings, offering unwavering support. "You're finally going home, Evie," Sarah said, her eyes glistening. "Not to Elmwood, but to where you truly belong." Moving cross-country was a monumental undertaking, but Eve felt lighter than she had in years. She kept Thomas's last letter and her old English notebook close at hand. The scent of dried forget-me-nots from his first letter, now faint, still evoked the promise of a long-ago spring. When she arrived in Ohio, Thomas was there to meet her, standing by his car, his white hair catching the afternoon sun. He had aged, yes, but his eyes still held the same warmth, the same deep intelligence that had captivated her as a teenager. He opened his arms, and Eve walked into his embrace, feeling a profound sense of coming home. It was a hug that held 50 years of unspoken history, of quiet admiration, of a connection that had patiently waited for its moment to bloom. His home was a reflection of him, cozy, filled with books, and a sprawling, meticulously kept garden. "My sanctuary," he said, gesturing to the vibrant blooms, "much like your garden in Astoria, I imagine." He had remembered. Their life together in Ohio unfolded with a gentle, natural rhythm. They spent their days in quiet companionship, reading side by side, discussing literature, taking long walks. And tending to the garden, Eve continued her writing, finding renewed inspiration in their shared world. Thomas, ever the teacher, would sometimes offer gentle edits or insightful comments on her latest prose, just as he had done decades ago in her notebooks. But now it was a partnership of equals, two mature artists collaborating on the canvas of their shared life. Their love was not a fiery, youthful passion, but something deeper, richer. Forged in the crucible of time and understanding, it was a profound intellectual connection, a shared reverence for words and ideas, and an emotional intimacy born from seeing and appreciating the very essence of each other's souls. They understood each other's quiet moments, their unspoken thoughts, their deepest vulnerabilities. It was a love built on the foundation of recognition, on the profound truth that he had seen her in her most formative years, and she had admired him with an intensity that had never truly faded. Thomas revealed more about his quiet admiration for her during her high school years. "I knew you were brilliant, Eve," he confided one evening as they sat by the fire reading. "But more than that, I knew you had a depth of feeling, a sensitivity that was rare. And when I read those extra pages in your notebooks, the ones where you truly let your soul speak, I saw a future, a profound voice waiting to be heard. I tried to nurture it, to encourage you, knowing my role was simply to light the path." Eve listened, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You did more than light the path, Thomas. You were the path. You made me believe my voice mattered. You made me believe I mattered." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "And you, Eve," he said, his voice soft, "you were a light for me too. In those early years of teaching, when I was still finding my way, your enthusiasm, your genuine hunger for knowledge, your raw talent, it reaffirmed my purpose. You made me a better teacher, and now you make me a better man." Their story, once a collection of unspoken feelings and secret admiration, had become a symphony of shared existence. The ink and the echo of her youthful words and his guiding wisdom had finally found their perfect harmony. It was a love story that had taken 50 years to write, a testament to the enduring power of connection, the quiet wisdom of patience, and the profound beauty of finding your true kindred spirit, not in the fleeting rush of youth, but in the deep, resonant peace of later life. Eve, the shy girl who had poured her soul into notebooks for the teacher she adored, had found her life's truest companion in the man who had remembered every word. The words, "I remember every one of your notebooks," were not just a nostalgic phrase. They were the very foundation of their profound connection, a promise fulfilled across half a century, a love finally recognized, cherished, and brought beautifully home. Their shared journey had culminated not just in a romantic union, but in the discovery of a lifelong intellectual and spiritual partnership, a deep resonance of remembrance that promised a future filled with quiet joy and profound understanding. Chapter 8, The Legacy of a Gentle Hand. Years turned into a decade. Eve and Thomas, now in their late 70s and early 80s respectively, lived a life of profound contentment in their Ohio home. Their days were a tapestry woven with shared reading, quiet conversations, gentle gardening, and the comforting rhythm of their intertwined lives. The love that had blossomed after 50 years of silence was not a fiery romance, but a steady, deep burning flame, illuminating their golden years with a warmth and understanding neither had ever truly known before. Eve continued her writing, her memoirs now often infused with the subtle grace and wisdom of Thomas's influence. She began a new project, a series of essays exploring the enduring impact of mentors and the unexpected ways destiny weaves its threads across time. Thomas, in turn, continued to be her most insightful and encouraging reader, his blue ink still marking her pages, though now with notes of shared affection rather than just academic guidance. Their story, shared with close friends and family, became a quiet legend. Rebecca, Thomas's daughter, saw Eve not just as her father's new partner, but as a remarkable woman who had brought a renewed vitality to his life. She often joked that Eve was the only student her father truly remembered, a testament to the profound connection they shared. Eve often found herself sitting in Thomas's study, surrounded by his vast collection of books, including his old teaching materials. Amongst them, carefully preserved, were more of her high school notebooks. She would pick one up, run her fingers over the faded covers, and reread her youthful scrawl. And always, on those extra pages she had filled with her deepest thoughts, were his comments, terse, insightful, affirming. Profound. Continue this thought. Yes, they were not just marks on a page, they were fingerprints on her soul, proof of a connection that had begun before either of them truly understood its significance. You knew, didn't you? Eve asked him one afternoon, holding one of her old notebooks. Even then, you knew there was something. Thomas, reading in his armchair, lowered his book, his eyes twinkling. I knew there was a truly remarkable mind, Eve, and a spirit that longed to be heard. I simply tried to listen and to give it the words to express itself. As for the rest, perhaps some things are simply meant to unfold in their own time. Their love was a testament to the idea that true connection transcends time, age, and circumstance. It was a love that understood the power of unspoken admiration, the quiet influence that shapes a life, and the profound beauty of finding a soulmate in the most unexpected of places. It was a love that whispered of destiny, of two people meant to walk through life together, even if their paths took a detour of half a century. One chilly autumn evening, as they sat by the fire reading, Thomas reached for Eve's hand. Do you remember that poem you wrote, Eve? He asked, his voice soft, filled with tender reminiscence. The one about a heart searching for a kindred spirit in a crowded room. Eve smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. I do. Well, he said, his gaze warm and unwavering. You found him, and I in you found the harmony I didn't even know I was searching for. His words, echoing back to her own youthful yearnings, brought a sense of profound completion. The circle was closed. The girl who had written her heart into her notebooks, hoping he would see, had found the man who remembered every single one. The teacher who had gently guided her, seeing her profound potential, had found his truest companion in the woman she had become. The ink from her youthful notebooks and the echo of his discerning eye had not just connected them across 50 years. They had built a bridge to a shared future, a harmony found in the resonance of remembrance. Their story was a quiet epic, a beautiful testament to the enduring power of a connection rooted in mind and spirit, a love that waited for half a century to finally, truly, and profoundly come home. The legacy of a gentle hand, guiding her words, had shaped not just a writer, but a life, leading her to the unexpected, profound love that completed her in every way. Chapter 9: The Garden of Quiet Joys. As Eve and Thomas settled into their shared existence, their lives became a harmonious blend of individual pursuits and comforting togetherness. Eve found a new depth in her writing, her words imbued with the quiet joy of her newfound companionship. Her essays often explored themes of late-life love, the beauty of second chances, and the profound satisfaction of discovering a kindred spirit when least expected. Thomas, with Eve by his side, seemed to gain a renewed vitality. He continued his passion for gardening, and Eve often found him in the mornings, already out among his roses, a peaceful smile on his face. She would join him, learning the names of flowers, the nuances of pruning, and the quiet satisfaction of coaxing life from the earth. Their garden became a metaphor for their relationship, carefully nurtured, vibrant with color, and offering a gentle sanctuary from the world. Their conversations ranged from the profound to the mundane, each topic explored with shared curiosity and mutual respect. They discussed the news of the day, debated literary theories, and sometimes simply sat in comfortable silence, their presence enough. Eve found a joy in this quiet companionship that surpassed any fleeting romantic excitement she might have imagined in her youth. It was a deep, abiding peace, a sense of truly belonging. Rebecca, Thomas's daughter, became a cherished part of Eve's extended family. She admired Eve's spirit and the happiness she brought to her father. Rebecca often visited, and the house would fill with laughter and the warmth of family, a vibrant contrast to Eve's solitary life in Santa Barbara. Eve reflected often on the young girl she had been, shy, awkward, secretly yearning for connection. Pouring her soul into those notebooks, she felt a profound tenderness for that version of herself, grateful for her quiet courage, her unspoken dreams, and her unwavering belief in the power of words. It was that girl, in her innocent devotion, who had set the stage for this later life blooming. And Thomas, he remained, in many ways, the same man who had inspired her all those years ago. Patient, insightful, with a deep well of knowledge and kindness. But now, he was also her partner, her confidant, her love. The distance of teacher and student had long dissolved, replaced by an intimacy born of shared experience and mutual affection. They celebrated their birthdays, their anniversaries, and the small victories of each passing day. Thomas would always gift Eve a new, beautiful notebook, sometimes with a rare first edition of a beloved classic tucked inside. Eve, in turn, would gift him rare seeds for his garden, or a first edition of a book she knew he would cherish. Their gifts were always steeped in meaning, reflecting the deepest parts of their shared passions. One evening, as they sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Ohio sky in hues of orange and purple, Thomas turned to Eve. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "when I wrote that first letter, I truly just intended to acknowledge a gifted former student. I had no idea it would lead to this." He gestured around their home, their garden, their shared space. Eve leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I had no idea that the quiet boy I poured my soul out to in my notebooks would become the man who knows my soul better than anyone. Life has a funny way, doesn't it?" "It does," he agreed, squeezing her hand. "A beautiful way." Their story wasn't just a testament to finding love later in life. It was a profound illustration of the enduring resonance of seemingly small moments. A teacher's gentle encouragement, a student's heartfelt scribblings. These fleeting interactions had laid the foundation for a connection that spanned half a century, ultimately leading two souls to their destined harmony. The ink and the echo had not only brought them together, but continued to deepen their bond. Every shared word, every knowing glance, every quiet moment of understanding built upon the foundation of that initial, powerful recognition. Their garden, their home. Their lives were now filled with the quiet joys of a harmony found, a profound testament to the lasting power of a connection that truly sees, truly remembers, and truly loves, beyond the boundaries of time. Chapter 10, The Last Page and a New Beginning. Years continued to pass, bringing with them the gentle accumulation of shared memories and the subtle erosions of time. Eve and Thomas were well into their 80s, their movements slower, their voices a little softer. But their minds remained sharp, their spirits vibrant, and their connection, if anything, deepened. Their love was a masterpiece of quiet understanding, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a profound appreciation for the paths that had eventually led them to each other. Eve's writing now took on a more reflective tone, exploring the quiet dignity of aging, the enduring power of love, and the unexpected gifts that life bestows in its later chapters. Thomas remained her first and most trusted reader, his discerning eye still catching nuances others might miss, his gentle suggestions always illuminating. They rarely spoke of the what if. What if they had met differently, earlier? The past was simply a part of their unique story, a prologue that had, in its own meandering way, led them to this perfect present. They understood that the very timing of their reunion, the half-century of separate lives and experiences, had shaped them into the individuals they needed to be to truly appreciate the depth of their connection. One afternoon, as they sat in the sun-drenched living room, Thomas with a volume of poetry, Eve with her latest notebook, he looked up, a soft smile on his face. "Eve," he said, "do you remember that time you wrote about the quiet magic of everyday moments back in one of your early notebooks?" Eve chuckled softly. "I do. I think I was trying to make sense of why a rainy afternoon or a simple conversation could feel so profound." "You captured it beautifully," he said, his voice filled with affection. "And I believe, my dear, we have found that quiet magic, haven't we? In these days, in this life we've built." Eve reached for his hand, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of his. "More than I ever dreamed possible, Thomas. More than I ever dreamed." Their days continued, filled with the simple, profound joys of companionship. Long, easy silences, punctuated by shared glances, comfortable laughter, and the quiet knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. They cultivated their garden, watched the seasons change, and continued their endless literary conversations. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, casting long shadows across their living room, Thomas closed his eyes and drifted peacefully away. His hand still gently clasped in Eve's. He had lived a life of purpose, of quiet influence, and in his final years he had found the harmonious echo he had perhaps unknowingly sought for half a century. Eve felt a profound sorrow, a loss that was deep and aching, but it was not a bitter grief. It was tempered by immense gratitude, by the knowledge that they had found each other, that their love had blossomed, defying time and expectation. She laid her head on his chest. listening to the silence, and remembered his words. I remember every one of your notebooks. And in that remembrance, she knew he had remembered her, truly seen her, loved her. In the days that followed, Eve found solace in her writing. She picked up her current notebook, the one with the soft leather cover, and began to write, not just about Thomas, but about their journey. She wrote about the shy girl and the inspiring teacher, about the passage of 50 years, about the unexpected letter, and the profound harmony they had eventually found. She wrote about the ink and the echo, about the legacy of a gentle hand, and about the garden of quiet joys they had cultivated together. She wrote until the last page was filled, feeling Thomas's presence with every stroke of her pen, his quiet encouragement guiding her words. When she finished, she closed the notebook, a sense of completion settling over her. It was the last page of this chapter of her life, but it was also a new beginning. Eve continued to live in their Ohio home, tending the garden, rereading their letters, and cherishing every memory. She dedicated herself fully to the Loretta Evelyn Foundation, channeling her experiences into a powerful narrative of hope and connection. She knew that her life, once a meticulously edited memoir of solitude, had become a sprawling, beautiful epic of unexpected love, profound recognition, and the enduring truth that some destinies, no matter how long the wait, are simply meant to be. The ink from her youthful words, the echo of his gentle wisdom, had not only brought them together, but had continued to resonate within her. Their love story, written across 50 years, had reached its final, poignant page, but the harmony it had created would continue to echo in her heart, a testament to a connection that transcended time, a love that finally, fully, and eternally came home. The last page wasn't an end, but a quiet, beautiful dedication to a love that would live forever in the resonance of remembrance.